Today we're going to look at a constellation of words and how they fit together in an important puzzle that has a huge impact in our lives. The first word is responsibility, and as it suggests, it's composed of response and ability. The ability and the willingness to respond. However, in terms of the responsibility that we're interested in, is a response that co-creates a desired pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, environment, and being. So useful responsibility, a useful ability to respond, creates a desired pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, a desired environment in which to be, and a desired state of being. And so we are the one who defines what is and is not desirable by desiring something. And all human beings innately desire to feel sustainably better and avoid feeling chronically worse. So it's going to be a state of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and an environment and a being that emerges out of that environment that for us personally feels better. And the responses that we make with our ability to respond, our willingness to respond, that creates that desired pattern is effective, is important. And if we look at, what we might want to respond to in order to do something useful with responsibility, the ability and the willingness to respond, one of the things that we might respond to is data about our personal human needs. And what we're responding to is what's likely to happen if we respond this way, or this way. Choice is innately connected to response ability, because if there's zero choice, then there isn't really much ability to respond. There's just a reaction with, a predetermined outcome. So the ability to respond necessitates a certain amount of choice. And to choose something, we need clarity about what we want to happen and understanding about how a given response will impact what is happening. So our response will have some impact, and that impact will affect the outcome. We can be effectively able and willing to respond when we know the outcome we want and we know how our impact will affect that outcome. And one of the things that we need in order to succeed in that is feedback from the reality, the person, an environment, a group, feedback about the desired impact versus the actual impact. So everyone desires to feel sustainably better and avoid feeling chronically worse. But if we create an outcome that increases our own suffering in some way, we need that feedback in order to understand and adjust our response. Now, responsibility and power are very closely linked. And so let's take a look at power as the second word here. Power is also the ability and willingness to act. So a slightly different word, responsibility. Power, the ability and willingness to act so as to create a desired outcome. It's not really power if we have the ability and willingness to act to create an undesirable outcome, because power is about creating a desired outcome. No one seeks more power in order to be more impotent to create what they want. Power is linked to the desire for a specific outcome. And for power to exist, we need the ability to take a wide range of actions. So we need choice. The willingness to take a wide range of actions. Clarity about which results that we desire. Understanding about how the actions we are available and willing to take will influence the desired outcome. And we also need a feedback mechanism to know how our actions are going to influence the outcome and are influencing the outcome. So power and responsibility are incredibly closely linked. If you have no ability and willingness to respond, you have no power. If you have no ability and willingness to act, you cannot take responsibility. Now, these two words connect closely with freedom. And to understand this, first of all, why is freedom a desirable trait? Why do we seek and value freedom? Well, with freedom comes the possibility and the probability of creating a desired outcome. If we are only free to create varying degrees of suffering, freedom is not terribly important. The value of freedom comes from the freedom to create something that we value. And what we all value is feeling sustainably better and avoiding feeling chronically worse. That's what every human being in the history of humanity has valued. And freedom is the ability and willingness to pursue our value, which is to have a desired experience of feeling sustainably better. Now, for freedom to exist, one needs self-awareness about one's desires, the ability and willingness to think, feel, say, do, buy, and be so as to generate a desired experience. Now, freedom in and of itself is neutral, because if you have, for example, the ability to walk, you can walk into a brick wall, you can walk into moving traffic, and you can walk and go shopping. You can walk around your house. You can run away from a fire. So the capacity to do something, the ability to act, can be used. It's a neutral trait. It can be used to create more suffering or more well-being. But its value, the reason we want power, responsibility, and freedom, is that it can be used to move towards an experience of feeling sustainably better. And it is that possibility, that if we know what we're doing, probability of creating a better experience with our freedom, that leads to most people choosing more freedom when it is available. Now, the other thing one needs is the understanding about which thoughts, feelings, actions, purchases, words, states of being, etc., are going to generate the experience we desire. So for freedom to be useful, we need to know that, for example, if we're free to type, we need to know that when we press this button, a letter A will appear. If we don't know what will create the desired experience, then freedom is useful because we can learn. We can learn through trial and error. But the purpose, the value of trial and error is to become more successful. At what? At creating a state of being. And the other thing that we need in order for freedom to be useful is a feedback loop that communicates whether or not we are getting closer or further away from the desired experience. So there's a very tight-knit kind of series of overlaps between power, responsibility, and freedom. If you don't have freedom, you don't have power. If you don't have the ability to respond, you don't have any freedom. If you don't have the ability and willingness to respond, you don't have power. If you don't have power, you don't have freedom. And so they're really approaching the same thing from slightly different angles. And that thing is the ability to realize what we desire, to imagine what we desire, and to create what we imagine, to realize a state of feeling better. Now, next we move on to the last word in this particular group, which is authority. The right to write. So the right, R-I-G-H-T, to write, W-R-I-T-E, or author, our own or another experience. So a right is a form of permission, a form of authority. So authority, an author, to write something. A writer has authority over what they put down on the page. And so one needs authority in order to have power, in order to choose and know what we value, etc. And so to have authority, it's a little bit different than power, etc. We gain authority with trust. And trust is ultimately based on trustworthiness. The trustworthiness to use authority, authorship, power, to bring about sustainable well-being to those who extend that trust. And so in the web of reality, where we have a large social and planetary ecology, things exist because they are created, but they also exist because the ecology allows them. And this is an important thing to understand, because whatever we are, it's much smaller than the global population, the population of a community, any given government, any given tribe. Whoever we are is much smaller than a landmass of a town, a city, and certainly the planet. And so our identity, the pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being, that I with, there is a pattern, and we say that pattern is me. I identify with this pattern. And that pattern exists in a larger ecology. And, let's take this room. If the oceans of the world descend upon this room in the next 10 minutes, there's really not much that I can do about that. My existing pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being will cease to exist. And what will be replaced is a tumbled corpse, and who knows what I would be thinking and feeling, etc., and all of that at that time. But it certainly wouldn't be a continuation of this video. And so the fact that I'm here is, in a sense, supported by the trees that provide me with oxygen, by the sun that has kept the earth at this temperature, by gravity that's holding all these things, including my body and the film equipment, to the floor, and holding the floor into the house and the house onto the ground. There's a tremendous amount of cooperation in the ecology around us that is allowing this moment in this particular form to exist. And if that ceases to be, for whatever reason, you could say that my entire neighborhood is allowing me to reside in this house and get access to electricity. And why do I say that? Well, it would only take one neighbor to cut off power to the house. They could come over in a few minutes, get out some large metal cutters and just cut the power to my house. And then that person is saying, no, I don't allow you to access your power and thus make your video. So I demand that who you are changes. I don't allow who you are to exist in this space. Now, I could go to another neighborhood and hook up to the electrical grid, etc., and a person could make an appearance there and again cut the power and say, no, for whatever reason, I don't allow you in my neighborhood. Now, I allow you and you and you and you, but I don't allow you. This pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being is something I don't allow. Now, we've seen that with homosexuality, for example, in different parts of the world. In some parts, homosexuality will be stoned to death. In other places, it will be met with nervous gossip and reduced employment opportunities. In other areas, it will be met with bullying. In other areas, it will be met with rape. In other areas, it will be met with confusion and fear and anxiety and anger. In other areas, it'll be met with a sigh of relief. In other areas, it will be met with delight and joy. And in other areas, it'll be met with curiosity. Oh, I've never heard of that, or what is that? And in other areas, it'll be met with righteous indignation. This is against the creed of the cult. And so the same habit, the same person in different environments will be supported, enabled, will be allowed, will be encouraged, will be met neutrally, We're neither going to move this way, or we'll be actively attacked. And this is true with any human state. And so the authorship, the authority to write our own lives, to some extent exists in a framework of causing and allowing. Because if all it takes is one person to get out a Colt 45 and shoot a bullet through our heart, just takes one person. 10,000 people can be fine with this, but one person can have a strong sense of distrust, a belief that somehow our identity, who we are, what we're thinking about, feeling, doing, planning, etc., is somehow going to result in more suffering for them and their family to such an extent that they don't want us to have the freedom, the authority, the power to create our lives, to influence other people. And they use their power, their ability, their willingness to act, to silence the body, to disrupt, to traumatize the body. In the case of a 45 bullet, it's not very difficult, to traumatize the body to such an extent to shatter the identity. So that identity, that pattern we are identifying with of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being just cannot return. And so you have authority based on trust. Totalitarian governments, for example, often do not trust their citizens with their, quote, freedom, because totalitarian governments, not being terribly trustworthy, are often undermined by the people they are dominating. And so totalitarian governments respond with all kinds of spies and intimidation and torment and torture tactics that reduce one's authority in a practical way to protest, to communicate, to have free speech. And so one needs trust, which is ultimately based on trustworthiness, to use that authority to bring sustainable well-being to those who extend that trust. Now, in order to earn that trust, we need competency. Competency is synonymous with skill. And the skills that we need to earn trust are the skills to create believable, sustainable well-being. And this ties also into ecology and the fact that we are an interconnected species. Because, just to give an example, if person A believes only in warfare and fear, they basically believe that human beings are bad, and that the only reason bad human beings do something good is because they're threatened with going to jail and this and that if they don't. And so if you want to give freedom or seek freedom to do something good in an area that you are not supervised, someone who believes in the innate evil of human nature will not allow it, because they will be convinced that as soon as you're out of view, you will exploit the vulnerability of your invisibility to do them harm or to do someone else harm. And so they will not allow that. Someone has to look at them, or we have to tie them up, we have to do this, etc. And so there's a connection between authority and competency to earn the trust. So to earn trust, we might need the competency to explain different levels of the brain. For example, the reptilian region of the brain is predatory by nature. It's in a fight, flight, freeze reptilian thinking. It will exploit freedom, etc., in ways that are not necessarily good for the group, etc. But the empathic brain will use its freedom, etc., to benefit those most in need. So one may need the skill and competency to explain brain distinction and the connection between traumatic pasts, hereditary trauma, and hereditary love and empathy. Because traumatic pasts tend to lead to unresolved traumas, which always accelerate or amplify the reptilian brain, and love and nurturing tends to lead to a nurturing dynamic which tends to accelerate and amplify the empathic brain, which leads to a focus on who's in the most pain and how can we help. Now, the other area of competency we need is the ability to imagine, explore the possibility, and write, W-R-I-T-E, write elegant paths towards sustainable well-being. And so for our authority to be competent, we need to imagine and explore a range of options, and then out of those range of options, pick elegant or efficient paths through that possibility field that lead to sustainable well-being for ourselves and others. And in order to do that, of course, we need access to power, freedom, and the ability and willingness to respond, as well as natural resources, time and energy of people, and places needed to enact the plan. We also need a feedback loop that indicates whether we're moving towards the desired goal, the desired script. An author writes a script and has the authority to enact, to play out the script. And so with a feedback loop, one can see how close one is getting to the script one is writing and how far away. But one can also have a second feedback loop that allows us to edit the script. So we can say that, the ideal script is Joe wakes up at 6 a.m., Joe eats breakfast of ham and eggs at 7 a.m., Joe catches the bus at 8 a.m., Joe arrives at work at 8:30 a.m., Joe does this until noon, then this, and Joe comes home, watches TV, goes to bed at 11 a.m., and repeats. That's the script that Joe has the authority to create. And you can see that on this day he got up late, or on that day the bus didn't come. And so there's deviation from and convergence with the script. But the other important feedback loop is that the best script? And what does that mean? Well, as all human beings desire to feel sustainably better and avoid feeling chronically worse, better or worse is the efficiency with which sustainable well-being is created. So if Joe is doing all of that, and it's taking 24/7 and X amount of natural resources, and Joe feels 4 or 5 out of 10. If you ask Joe how good he feels, how satisfied he is with his life, he says 5 out of 10. 10 being perfect, 0 being neutral. Joe feels 5 out of 10. Now, if you write a new script A better script is a script that takes less energy and gets a higher score. Let's say Joe gets up at 6 a.m. and meditates for 30 minutes. And rather than ham and eggs, he eats what? Strawberries and salad, something he likes better, something that gives him more energy in his body. And Joe takes his electric bicycle to work and in the process does this and does this. And so you edit the script and you get a different bit of feedback. Because at the end of the new script, Joe feels 7 out of 10 or 8 out of 10. Now that's a better script because you took the same amount of time, a similar amount of energy, natural resources consumed, and a similar amount of money, but you've written a different routine. You've created a different script, and the important thing is that Joe has a higher level of life satisfaction and well-being with that script than with the old script. Now, for Joe to edit the script, to use that authority competently, Joe needs to be able to anticipate what he's likely to feel so that he doesn't have to try everything under the sun, including all kinds of horrible things, and discover, oh, that feels terrible. I mean, Joe doesn't have to decide whether or not to try sticking a knife through his arm and just see if that improves his day, because he can use competent imagination to rule that type of thing out, and can use the same competency and knowledge to say, well, over here I'm likely to feel a lot better. Based on the past, based on my imagination, based on the research that I've done, I'm going to feel more energized if I eat this instead of this. Let's give that a try. And so the second bit of feedback is the feedback that helps Joe iterate and create a better script, a script that takes the same amount of time, money, and natural resources, but yields a higher result in sustainable well-being. Now, the other thing that can be, and is really important, is the ability and willingness to receive help. Now, the internet is help. A book is help. Praying to a higher power is help. Meditating to, a beautiful image is help. Chanting with others is help. Conversation is help. Asking for advice, going to school is help. The ability and willingness to receive help is part of competency, and it's part of effective authorship. We receive help from the trees and plants that are generating oxygen in order to experience this moment of enjoyable breath. And so power, freedom, responsibility all connect as necessary ingredients of authority, of authorship of our own life and the lives of those who grant us authority, who grant us the ability to influence their lives, either by tolerating our existence, supporting our existence, amplifying our impact in some way. The right to authority has 3 evolutionary levels that are also, important to understand. And the first level, evolutionary level of authority, is the law of mass. So this is the level of the reptilian brain where might makes right, and the bigger energy pattern has the right to command the smaller energy pattern to change because it can. So a bowling ball has the right to send a pinball flying when they collide. And that right is dictated by mass. The bowling ball is bigger than the pinball. And so it has the authority, the right, based on, you could call it dominance. You could call it the law of mass. And this is completely reptilian and is the basis for all reptilian authority on the planet today. We're going to do this because we can. And if you don't like it, we're going to kill you. We're going to torture you. We're going to cause you suffering. That's the first evolutionary basis for authority. Reptilian might makes right. Now, the second level of authority on an evolutionary level, the second evolutionary wave of authorship and right, is the law of rational self-interest. Now, a bowling ball will always knock a pinball flying when the two collide, because the bowling ball is 50 times bigger. Now, just because the bowling ball is bigger does not mean it's more intelligent. It certainly doesn't mean it's more ethical. The bowling ball could be moving towards a cliff, and the pinball is saying, come on, out the way, let's avoid falling off this cliff. And the bowling ball is not rational. It's just big. And so if it collides, then they both go over the cliff. Now, the law of rational self-interest is only possible for human beings who have a rational brain. It's a huge evolutionary step, and it allows the possibility to transition from the law of the reptile, the law of mass, to the law of rational self-interest. So a group of bullies applying the law of mass to torment some godforsaken human being can be confronted with words. Don't kill me. Don't beat me. I can help you. Now, you can get your pleasure from beating me and proving that you are bigger than me, but I have something that would give you more pleasure. And the gang, the bullies, have the ability to hear the offer. So we can move from the law of mass to the law of rational self-interest. And in this sense, as long as what is being proposed is better than any option available through dominance, then it can be adopted or will be adopted as long as both people are rational and want to improve their lives. And that's part of being rational. If you don't want to improve your life, you're going counter to most of evolutionary training and programming, and so you could be considered insane, dissociated with the core tenets of life. This relates to, it all ties to the rational brain, and this is the second primary basis for authority on the planet today. And so might makes right. I can, so I will, because that's what I feel like. That's what's going to go on because I can, is a very dominant basis for power, for authority. And the second is the basis of rational self-interest. I could hurt you but the police might get involved. And so I'm not going to. I could bully you, but then you won't help me. I could not pay you because I've got a security force and you don't have that. But if I do that, then maybe you won't work for me tomorrow and I won't make as much money in the long term. And so the reptilian sociopathic program moves towards the rational self-interest, which is a little bit more long term. Now, the next evolutionary expression of authority is the law of empathy. And this ties in with the empathic brain. So the law of empathy is defined by two questions. Who is in the most pain? How can we be of maximum assistance to them so as to alleviate this pain? And you can tell if someone is in their empathic brain center primarily when they are asking those two questions and acting on them. Now, this state of evolution, is much more recent than the 200 million year old crocodile brain, the reptilian brain, and the last 100,000 years of the rational brain. And it determines perhaps 20 or 30% of the decisions on the planet today. So if you look at why certain things are and are not happening, throughout that thread, there will be a sense of someone caring about someone else. And the pure expression of empathy is who's in the most pain, how can we help, who is most affected by this, and how can we modulate what's going on in a way that benefits those most affected, versus who has the most power and how can they exploit and dominate those who have the least power. So it's the polar opposite of the reptilian principle. Now, it's important to understand that the law of empathy is dramatically more efficient than the reptilian and rational brain, because tremendous energy is spent in a reptilian paradigm of protecting from other reptiles, because other reptiles are not empathic, and so they're not trustworthy. Now, the final evolutionary state of authority is the law of beauty, truth, and goodness. And in this brain, which is the transcendent brain, we have the most fleeting and fragile connection. And so we have a very slim part of our world today is generated. A very small amount of human behavior happens because that behavior is the most beautiful, the most true. It's the behavior filled with the most goodness of all behaviors that are possible. What is the most complex, beautiful, and true ideal? And who has the vision to articulate it? So, while the law of mass is the most basic and undisputed right, moving towards rationality and empathy as a moral center for right. The law of beauty, truth, and goodness leads to the highest state of grace and intelligence by accessing the transcendent brain mixed with empathy and informed by the rational brain. Now, if you want to live get out of the way of a moving bus, even if it's driving on the sidewalk, because the right of way, the might makes right of the base brain and the base density of the reptilian brain and the law of mass is the densest reality. It doesn't really matter if someone else is breaking the law, driving a bus towards you. If you want to live, you jump out of the way. And at the same time, when a bus is not determining, what you do and don't do in a given moment of panic and reaction, if you can move towards the higher levels of programming, where moving from might makes right to rational self-interest, and from rational self-interest to the law of empathy, which is the first state by which one becomes human. One can be a very intelligent sociopath as someone mingling enlightened self-interest with the reptilian might is right program. One doesn't become a human being until one connects with the human heart. The human heart connects with the empathic program and brain of who's in the most hurt, pain, how can we help? And as we move towards something more idealistic, more beautiful, true, and good, and there is a cooperation around that within the foundation of empathy, that's when you have the highest level of value, the highest level of grace. Because grace is linked to efficiency. And when a human being is in relationship with a reptile, be it a snake, be it a sociopath, the human being cannot turn their back on the sociopath or the snake, because it might be in the short-term interest of the reptile to exploit and seize the energy of the human being. And so a defense has to be maintained as long as there is a strong component of reality that is reptilian. One must have a deterrent. And what a deterrent does to a reptile is it says that if you hurt me or use me, you will be hurt as well. So you're not going to protect me because you care about me. That's empathy. You're going to protect me because of your instinctual survival nature, and I need to organize a system where if you don't protect my boundaries, my rights, my well-being, that you will be harmed as well as I am harmed. And that will serve as a fence to protect reptiles. If a crocodile watches enough of their relatives being shot dead with a revolver, when the crocodile sees that little shape, that pattern, and associates that with dead crocodiles, they will retreat. Not out of empathy. It's not out of love or humanity for the human, out of fear, because all reptilian program is fear-based, fear of pain. And to live in a reptilian environment is to live in fear of pain, is to be subhuman. What turns a reptile, an animal, however intelligent at recognizing language and patterns, what turns a sociopath into a human being is empathy. And what allows the empathic brain to blossom is empathy. Trauma, a reptilian behavior, to send an intense burst of energy that is beyond what a person can digest, that shatters their identity physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. Trauma is a violation of identity. It's reptilian. And so to violate someone's identity in some way communicates that I'm a reptile, particularly if it's conscious. Now, of course, it's hard to know in a cult or culture such as our own whether it's conscious or not, because there's so little intimacy amongst so many random strangers. But whether it's intentional or not, it is traumatic to violate another person's identity. When you violate another person's identity, they are traumatized. In their traumatized state, their empathic centers of the brain shut down, and their reptilian, their sociopathic centers of fight, flight, freeze, and fawn come into space in order to react and protect the energy pattern, to keep the body alive in what is presumed to be a reptilian state. So we have the oldest and crudest and most developed brain that helps survive, that keeps the body alive, the reptilian brain, the might makes right. And then we have the most recent evolutionary state of the brain, the transcendent brain, the part that goes beyond the individual to we are one. That is a part of something more, that empathizes with everything. And each has their evolutionary place, their pro and con, but naturally, it's a lot more fun to be in the empathic centers of the brain. It's a lot more fun to be in the transcendent centers of the brain than it is to be an irrational sociopath or a highly competent and calculating sociopath without the capacity to love or be loved. Because a crocodile cannot love, but they also cannot experience being loved because they have no access to an empathic brain. Now, a human being will naturally evolve through the reptilian to the rational to the empathic to the transcendent regions of the brain, unless that evolution is interrupted with trauma in early childhood. If it's interrupted severely as the empathic brain is being formed or prior to the empathic brain coming fully online, then what one has is a reptile in human form that has been evolutionarily stunted by a reptilian culture, by a reptilian environment. And they go hand in hand because an empathic environment does not allow an infant to be severely and repeatedly traumatized into a reptilian state by incompetent parents. it takes a certain amount of cruelty, a certain amount of incompetence, a certain amount of reptilian attitude and behavior for an infant to be so stunted that their humanity is effectively robbed by their own biology, which tells them clearly, you are among reptiles, do not become empathic. It'll kill you. These people are not trustworthy. Be suspicious. Follow the reptilian code. And so one has a mirroring dynamic where the reptilian aspects within a cult or culture show up in a certain number of the infants and children who are predominantly reptilian in response in order to survive, and who grow and evolve on the sociopathic path of being more and more sophisticated sociopaths because their humanity has been taken away from them.